Hi guys, today we will continue to discuss the revised quarantine rules and regulations of 2004, Part 8, Part 9, and Part 10. So let's start first with the Part 8. So Part 8, Requirements on Sanitation and Food Safety for Domestic Inter-Island Vessels, Port, Airport, Terminal, and Food Service Establishments. So Section 47 of Part 8, Sanitation and Food Safety. The Bureau shall take all necessary steps to ensure the maintenance of a sanitary environment within the domestic ports and airports, including the supervision and control of the sanitation of inter-island vessels, food service establishment, and terminals in coordination with the port or airport and shipping authorities. These measures are in line with the provisions of PD 856, otherwise known as the Sanitation Code of the Philippines, particularly Chapter 15, Port, Airport, Vessel, and Aircraft Sanitation. 47.2 Sanitary Facility Requirements of Inter-Island Vessels. Provide adequate and proper storage of potable water aboard ship with sanitary safeguards from the shore water distribution system. Next is adopt the good manufacturing practices for food safety and sanitation on board ship. Next is provide hand washing and toilet facilities and approve sewage disposal and drainage system. Next is provide adequate and safe accommodation facility for crew and or passengers. Next is provide of sanitary storage and approve waste disposal system. And lastly is maintain pests and vermin control. Next is 47.3 Sanitation facility requirements of port terminals, catering points, and food service establishment. Comply with the local ordinances regarding the structural setup of the terminal in accordance with the National Building Code of the Philippines. Next is provide sanitation facility requirements of food handlers working in the terminal. And lastly is comply with the requirements of drinking water supply in accordance with the Philippine National Standards for Drinking Water, Waste and Sewage Disposal, Vermin Abatement Program in the building and premises. Section 48, Food Safety Requirement. Enhance the provision of sanitation and food safety in the area of responsibility at both domestic and international ports and airports of entry, including in-flight catering, food service establishment, vessels, and aircraft. Next is adopt the hazard analysis, critical control points, audit system, and monitoring the food safety program implemented at the area of responsibility. Next is ensure mandatory compliance of the good manufacturing practice, hazard analysis, critical control points, provision and guidance values and standards for the assessment of sanitary and quality of food served by the food service establishment and in-flight catering points at ports and airports of entry, both domestic and international. And lastly is comply with the physical medical examination of stewards and food handlers for the issuance of health certificate. Section 49, Monitoring and Evaluation. The Bureau of Quarantine shall conduct a methodical examination and review of procedures and records of the program or system with a detailed report of findings. Guidelines will be promulgated in establishing monitoring procedures and tracking system operations, deviation from the standard requirements, and establishments of records for use in verification. Part 9, Requirements for cargoes and materials for medical transplant and research. Section 50, Regulations on importation and exportation of cargoes. Cargoes that are considered to harbor vectors of infectious disease subject to the regulations, emerging disease, and or public health emergency of international concern. Cargoes from plague-infected port that are vulnerable to harbor rats or fleas shall be fumigated prior to its unloading in the port. Gunny sacks or jute bags or cargoes wrapped with the same materials coming from the plague-infected countries shall be fumigated prior to the release to the consignee unless covered by a valid fumigation certificate. Next is other cargoes that may carry vector-borne disease and or cargoes potentially exposed to disease, subject to the regulations, emerging disease and or public health emergency of international concerns of public health concerns shall be subject to quarantine measures. And lastly is cargoes containing hazardous material, radiological, biological, or chemical waste, etc. are subject to stringent quarantine, inspection, and measures. Section 51. Regulation and importation and exportation of materials for medical transplant and research. Organs or tissues of human origin, culture of bacteria or any live microbe or collection of organisms that may cause any disease to humans or any insect, animal, or plant, and its byproducts potentially capable of transmitting a disease to humans shall not be admitted nor to be transported to or from the Philippines without specific permit issued by the Director of Quarantine in coordination with concerned agencies such as veterinary, plant, fish, and wildlife quarantine. Next is organs, tissues, or specimens of human origin which are solely for medical or clinical research and are non-infectious shall secure a quarantine permit or clearance prior to its admission or shipment. This shall be accompanied by necessary documents or protocols secured from the Bureau of Food and Drugs. Part 10. Clearance of human remains. Section 52. Regulations and clearance of human remains. The admission of human remains into the country shall be governed by the following regulations. All human remains arriving at the Philippine ports and airports coming from foreign countries shall be accompanied by the following documents for quarantine clearance: death certificate or a true copy thereof with proper translation certified by the appropriate authorities from the country of origin. Next is certification from the consul at the country of origin. Next is certificate that there is no existence of pestilence from the health authority of the country of origin. Next is embalming certificate stating that the human remains have been properly embalmed and placed in hermetically sealed. And lastly is cremation certificate stating that the human remains have been properly cremated and the ashes shall be placed in a hermetically sealed urn or a similar container. Death caused by a highly pathogenic organism, infectious disease subject to the regulations, emerging disease and or public health emergency of international concern, the remains may be issued quarantine clearance under the following conditions. First is the remains should be cremated before shipment in case of the grave public health threat posed by the disease. Next is for other cases that need no cremation, the casket should remain permanently sealed from the port of origin and burial must take place within 24 hours after the issuance of clearance of admission into the country. Human remains for transport to foreign or domestic ports shall secure a quarantine permit before shipment with the following documents. First is death certificate or a true copy thereof. Next is embalming certificate stating that the human remains have been properly embalmed and placed in a hermetically sealed. And lastly is cremation certificate stating that the human remains have been properly cremated and the ashes shall be placed in hermetically sealed urn or a similar container. So that's all, and thank you for listening.